Nonprofit friends, welcome back to another episode of a Modern Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tosha Anderson, I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about scaling your nonprofit through systems and not stress. I am super passionate about this topic, not only because I've worked specifically for a nonprofit that grew pretty rapidly with some pretty complex government funding. So I'll add some takeaways and some thoughts there, but also I work with so many different organizations that are under the same stress right now, trying to figure out how to scale their infrastructure, their processes, and procedures to keep pace with their growth. It's not just me and my words of experience. I'm bringing along my new friend, Dr. Andrea Ortega. Andrea, you are the founder and CEO of Palante nonprofits. I was trying to say that in Spanish, but my brain was not switching gears right away. But nonetheless, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your words and wisdom on how can nonprofits really focus on their systems, processes, and scale without overwhelming their teams? And how can we be more forward thinking about that? So before we dive in, thank you for taking time out of your busy day and chatting with us about this super important topic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Tasha. I've been following your journey, and like you, I also worked and I ran my own grassroots because no one really grows up saying I'm going to be in the nonprofit sector, but it lands
Yes.
on our lap.
Yes.
And with that came, a lot of, I love the word scrappy because we tend to be very scrappy, very creative in scaling. And sometimes, um, we don't know that there are ways to do it systematically and to do it without
Mhm.
burning out and without wearing all of the hats at the same time. And that's actually something that I learned, not just through my studies and the organizations I get to work with, but because I've made some of the mistakes myself.
Yeah.
And so I really have dedicated the last couple of years in, sharing that knowledge with others.
Mhm.
Because I don't know about you, but I think opening a nonprofit is a lot harder than opening a for-profit where
Yeah.
your services and your stuff is clear versus the other way where you're selling a mission, a feeling, or
Right.
that. So super excited to be here.
Yeah, exactly. I've had this interesting experience, like I was saying, of working for a nonprofit that was rapidly expanding, but then also starting a whole firm, a for-profit firm, from the ground up. And one of the things that I've really learned, and I tell people often, with any sort of business, that especially if they're rapidly growing, it feels like you're re-engineering your entire organization, like every 6 months or every year. And what was working at one point, doesn't work anymore, and finding time to reflect on what's not working and then research the possible solutions, then implement said solutions. When you, as I often joke with my team, like I have no business being the one responsible for figuring this out because I have no background in it. So entrepreneurs, nonprofit founders, they're in that together. But I agree with you. Working in the nonprofit space and starting that certainly from the ground up has its own unique set of challenges because there's strings tied to how we spend the money. There are requirements that we have to follow from a compliance standpoint. And then, of course, let's not forget and gloss over the fact that we have a board that we're accountable, different than, Andrea, like you and I, we own our own firms. We can kind of do things as we want now or not, right? But
Yeah.
but specific to nonprofits, let's dive into kind of what I see so often. Organizations, they have data scattered across different systems and different spreadsheets and emails, and maybe it was a product of over time, different people doing it, so different interpretations of how things are going. And board
Hmm.
meetings feel like fire drills, or even, dare I say, funder meetings or grant reporting. It's a nightmare to try to pull all this information together. And I'm sure people that get to their wits' end, that's why they reach out to you. And certainly on the
Hmm.
financial management side, that's why they reach out to the charity CFO and me. When you walk in that kind of environment, though, I'm really curious, how do you help transform this like reactive panic moment into something that's maybe more proactive and supports some sort of sustainable growth, shall we say? That's the dream anyway.
Yeah, believe it or not, I actually write into a lot of my work and proposals, just listening and observations and doing like listening sessions with people. And it's my listening sessions are also like share your screen. How do you do this process? Like, how do you
Mm,
do it? And documenting it, and especially now with like, there's so many tools. Like, you can do a Loom video and it'll create an SOP for you. But in
mhm.
the beginning, before I go into building SOPs or building systems, like, I want to make sure that I understand what's working and what isn't. I sometimes like, there's an organization I'm working with right now who showed me the spreadsheet. And there are many people who are like, ew, no spreadsheet, but this spreadsheet's working and people are
Mm,
maintaining it. So why am I going to
hmm.
break that? Why am
Sure.
I going to introduce something like Monday.com, which we've been working with the board to introduce some kind of OKR tracking and stuff? And I'm like, no, we're not going to move this for right now. It's working. I want people to feel comfortable editing it. We can talk in a couple of months once we've introduced, this project management system in other aspects, and then we'll move it
Hmm.
over because if we do it right at the moment, like the people who are used to this process might not implement it into their day-to-day lives. Because
Right.
when we think about systems, technology, or anything that we're going to use to scale, it's about how comfortable we feel with it and how if it's a habit for me to open this
Mm,
spreadsheet every morning, and you're like all of a sudden, no, I have to do the Monday board or I have to do use Notion and it's not something I'm familiar with, I'm probably not going to do it as much. And so to me, it's about listening to what they're doing and what works and making
mm,
sure that I'm working with them um, to move into process. And I love that you mentioned something that um, you sometimes every 6 months have to change because you've scaled from hundreds to thousands. Um, and if you have the foundational of the process, it doesn't matter what tool you use or what new step you introduce. If you have it laid out and people can refer to it, it does become easier. But what
hmm.
happens with nonprofit leaders? We don't think at the end of the day, oh, I created something. Let me make sure I leave a document of how I did it. We don't do
Hmm.
that. That's
Hmm.
not in nature, especially with moving so fast. And
Right.
so when it comes to data, depending on where the organization is, I just try to find out like, how are you tracking it right now, if at all? And if you weren't, I'll start asking. And if you're not tracking something that maybe a board member wants to start seeing in their next board meeting, I start to getting like, if we were to find that information, how easy is it for you to get it? I was just
Mm,
working with them on like redoing the OKRs because a lot of people will use ChatGPT, give me OKRs and KPIs to track, and
hmm.
ChatGPT will go all the way to like impossible. And I'm
Hmm.
like, if you want to track engagement in social media or whatever, like let's start with the baseline. Let's
Yeah.
work with the person in marketing. We have 900 followers. Let's see if they can get to 1,500 by a set date. That's a more attainable rather than saying like increase engagement by 75%. Like, what does that even mean?
Right.
So, so really working with them, with people with language that's realistic, and then
Hmm.
using that data for how we're going to incorporate it into the day-to-day lives. How can we build habits so that the marketing person is checking every Friday where our numbers, where our followers are, and how that can go in a spreadsheet or the Monday board that will eventually lead to the governance board that I'm building for the board. So little things like that. But in the beginning, listen, document, and then, from there, figure out what are small things we can do now to prepare for us for scaling.
I love that you said, take an honest look at your systems and if they're working, we don't necessarily always have to change them. Lord knows
Hmm.
there's, as I always say, on any given day I have 99 problems, and this is not at the top of my list. And so really, I think you bring up a good point. If something is actually working, and when I mean working, I mean people are actually following the process. It's not extraordinarily, inefficient or labor intensive in any way. It's getting you the results or the data collection that you need, whatever that might be. Just changing it for the sake of incorporating into maybe like a shiny new object, a new software solution or whatever, to your point, it will then fall off the habits of the folks. And that to me, when implementing system changes, is the is the biggest hurdle to overcome. I mean, you could
Yeah.
implement a system. I think people get hung up and get anxiety about this new software and we have to implement it, we have to get the data. But I find that that is not easy, but it's getting the habits built and the folks trained and building the consistency and the application of this new process across your team organizational wide is not something to take lightly. So I love that. Like, why change it if it's actually working? So I
Yeah.
can see that. Now you mentioned boards. Let's go back to boards for a little bit because you had mentioned like KPIs and tracking and goals and specific goals and all those sort of things. And I love that. And I'm a huge proponent of boards really focusing on high level strategy, not getting so much into the weeds. But I definitely have seen a spectrum of they're either like overly involved, micromanaging, want to know every single detail, or they're really just there in name only and completely disappear. So I'm curious from your experience with developing systems. You mentioned something about building dashboards and a Monday board and maybe making it a little bit more collaborative. What do you do when leadership feels like board meetings are just reruns of the same conversation? Whether it's here we go talking about how much we spent on office supplies again, or just a basic reporting out the board members, if they show up, they're pretty disengaged and they're not actually having meaningful conversation in any way, at least at a strategic
Yeah.
level.
Yeah, these are two parts of the spectrum I'm very familiar with. And I'm gonna start with one that I think is pretty easy. If your board is not engaging and you have had the talk, when I say you have had the talk, it's not even just coming from a place of attacking them because they might not have been onboarded to the point where they actually understand their responsibilities or their fiscal responsibility.
Hmm.
I literally sometimes do workshops like you want to talk finances? Did you know that you're fiscally responsible for signing and doing the 990? Like that is not on the accounting firm you hire. Like the
Hmm.
board is responsible for getting that
Hmm.
out. So they may not know. So after you've had the conversation of, hey, this board feels disengaged, I want to review the responsibilities. Honestly, are you in or out?
Right.
Because somebody is taking up space for a board seat that could actually be for somebody else. And, I wouldn't say I don't want to use the word laziness, but all of that kind of behavior is contagious.
Mm.
So once you have one board member who is just the person, it's like those group projects, the guy who just shows up the day they're
Hmm.
presenting and didn't do
Yeah.
anything. If
Right.
you have that person, it's going to be contagious. So your goal is to make sure that you have people who are engaged in the organization and every 60, 90 days or whenever, depending on your bylaws, like you could literally say, are you in or out? If not, help
Mm.
us start recruit for the next chair. Like you guys can make right. Don't just hold on to here because of the name, or I serve on the leadership council, not the board because I don't have the commitment. And so there's
Mm.
also orgs that have advisory boards. So like maybe you still want to
Hmm.
champion an ambassador for the old board, but you can't give your time. So like move them away from the responsibilities and get people who actually deserve a seat in your organization, right?
Yeah.
And so that's that kind of extreme of very engaged, but obviously come from a place of like maybe they didn't know better. And if you have
Hmm.
tried to fix it and rectify it, then handle out. From the
Hmm.
board that is very into teams. My favorite response when I would get, pushback, because I used to get, I also have a little bit of compliance. I have experience in compliance, but I remember the board at oftentimes being like, well, why aren't you applying for federal grants? And I'd be like, do you know
What goes into
how
that?
many people probably need to hire for my team just to handle that federal
Hmm.
grant? Like, or I'll be like, sure, like, come meet with me twice a week and let's get this application in because it's hours. Even the submission part of
Hmm. Hmm.
grants.gov, even the submission could just take hours uploading all the different things that they need. And so my answer is be like, great, I could pursue that. Could I get a member of the board to dedicate 3 hours with me for the next
Yeah.
5 weeks to see if we can get this in? Or can you provide the budget to hire someone who knows this knowledge?
Right.
Because you have to kind of push back. Like, okay, you want me to do A, B, C, and D? Here are the things I need to do my job if you want me to take that route. And if you do choose to pursue federal, make sure that they know that that's a long-term investment in the reporting too, as I'm sure you
Hmm.
know, Tasha. Like
Yes.
federal grants you don't play with, and the rules are completely different from a funder who might just be giving you money because they support the mission.
Right.
And if there is someone getting too much into the weeds, try to like be like, okay, your role as the board is to oversee the fiscal and all the strategy. If you want to do in the day to day, I will treat you as a volunteer, and here's the
Hmm.
expectations, like, and if that doesn't work, then yeah, you could definitely like ask, like, hey, I want to run the day to day. I'm not able to do my job if you're here, like have those deep and hard conversations. But in the beginning, I'm always like, um, I'm someone that likes to believe that people come from a place of good. So maybe that
Hmm.
board member just wants to do more. So if
Hmm.
you give them a path, be like, great, you want to do more? Like see if you
Right.
can do A, B, C, and D as a volunteer, understand the process we go through with all the rest of the volunteers.
Sure.
And maybe give them a space. But if not, then yeah, I think reviewing those responsibilities. And there are things like working boards, right? Especially if they're small grassroots where they play that double role. But for those, I like to have very clear job descriptions, like, okay,
Hmm.
in board meetings, you're the treasurer. If you're going to also act as the program director until we can hire someone, then there are two different distinctions and things like that. So being very distinct about what that kind of looks like.
Yeah.
is really important to that dynamic that you have with the board.
I have an interesting question for you.
Yeah.
For me personally, I'm puzzled by this sometimes because I've seen it go both ways. So from somebody that has started an organization, sounds like you're involved in different boards and different capacities and committees at least, and you certainly work very closely with boards in your work and leadership. So boards typically, set the vision or, if it's a founder, obviously they set the initial vision, but in theory, they would focus on strategy, like you were saying. And typically, there would be maybe a strategic plan, hopefully. And typically that would be mapped out with maybe some high level goals. And in your work, you help develop like dashboards and KPIs and that sort of thing, and at least create some systems of measurement, make sure that we're moving the needle on these things. So if the board signs off, I guess in my experience, a strategic plan is usually done in collaboration with the internal, we'll call it the internal team and the board, and maybe other outside stakeholders. And setting some kind of intentions or their focus or priorities are set, in that plan. And then the goals are oftentimes set as part of that strategic plan. Like, what are the milestones, or kind of like a Gantt chart I've certainly seen. But going down to like the more practical like KPIs
Mhm.
on how we're measuring what we're doing within our work. You mentioned some things like marketing KPIs and things of that nature, but certainly there's other like fundraising KPIs and programmatic KPIs. And I hear the word KPIs and dashboards and board dashboards all the time in my work and just passively because I sit on boards too. So my question is this, who do you think should be setting those kind of organizational measurements and KPIs on just like some of those day-to-day activities in a way that's reported out to the board at these board meetings so that we're not getting into the weeds, but we're also focusing on, strategy and high level conversations because I guess where I've seen it is sometimes the boards are like, CEO, like come up with your goals and what are we measuring and what are we doing? Like we agree with the vision, we're on board with that, but like what are you doing day to day? Or like what's the general direction we're going, or are we on the right path? And then I've seen like the CEOs are like, board, you're supposed to set the strategy. Tell me what you want me to do. So I've seen it on both
Mhm.
sides. What is your take on this whole
Yeah, no, I
dynamic?
think it should be, yeah, I think, I think it should fall actually um, on the executive director and their team to be a part of the conversation.
Hmm.
In an ideal world, the board are people, professionals who may
Hmm.
understand the strategy and the things that they should, that each department and that's why I say like it's really important that that your boards are diverse. You should have
Hmm.
someone who's knowledgeable about marketing. You should have someone who's knowledgeable about
Hmm.
fundraising, even if they're not doing the day to day, but someone that your board that people can go to your board for help. And in terms of, those KPIs that you measure, they should be collaborative to the strategic plan because the strategic plan is not just a PDF.
Right.
It's a living document that should also iterate with the given times.
Hmm.
If you let's say someone had put in their strategic plan, go viral on TikTok or something. TikTok shut down
Hmm.
for weeks. What if it hadn't
Hmm.
reopened?
Right.
You have to go back and redo your KPIs and see where you want to
Sure.
switch your focus to. So like it should be a living document that's consistently changing, but also that you can revisit and be realistic. And this is why I say it's so important to find a baseline before you come up with these crazy KPIs. Like
Hmm.
you want marketing to be better at posting or whatever, then how much are they posting now? Let's
Right.
say they're posting twice a week. Okay, give them a goal of getting to posting 4 a week, but make sure you also add reels because reels are, if you know marketing, video content
Hmm.
tends to get more views. So like, you know, that's where the board is strategizes. Okay, we want to see you post more, but we want you to incorporate more videos and reels. And
Hmm.
then take it a step further and said, how can we help? Can the board
Hmm.
record videos for you?
Hmm.
Can we help you do a campaign? Because then you're showing that you're sharing strategy and being a part of the solution, not the problem.
Hmm.
And then, marketing will be like, wow, the board has offered to do this. Let's schedule a recording day. Let's do this. Let's, build the KPIs where we're trying to meet our posting. And then, something as simple as like you can automate. I'll use an example. I either use Monday.com or Asana. Like you can set that KPI and you can remind the social media team to update how much they posted and then go back and visit. And then in the dashboard, see like, oh, look, 9 out of the 10 weeks of the quarter or whatever, we did
Mhm.
4 posts a week. And then let's say that's the baseline. We increase their posting. Now study how much views and activities they got. And then from there, build on increase in engagement and
Mhm.
activity. So like really important to know, what does my team do good now? Where do they need help? And building realistic KPIs, um, and looking themselves like the board. Do you have quorum yet? Do you meet quaternary meetings? That's a good
Mhm.
KPI for you. How many
Right.
meetings out of the year do you meet your quorum and what is
Right.
attendance? And then maybe you could put on yourself, look, one of our KPIs as a board is we promise to maintain 95% attendance for this year and being the example for those kind of things.
Mm.
And yeah, I think they should be decided, as a team, as a committee. I like to think of the strategic planning as a committee, a combination of outside stakeholders like day-to-day
Mhm.
staff, the executive director, and then of course the board. But then being really open so that's going to be flexible. And once you know the baselines of where you are, like building from that.
Yeah.
Um, because having a KPI that's like go viral, like that's not that's not
Yeah.
realistic. What is our current views like? How much are we posting and building from there? And then you can build on that.
Yeah, I definitely find myself sitting in board meetings occasionally where we talk at very like kind of granular level KPIs. And I think that's really important for whether it's goals or certain metrics or whatever we're
Hmm.
reporting out. I think it's kind of situational by organization. To your
Hmm.
point, I mean, grassroots organizations might have more of a working board, whereas other boards, I mean, if I was an executive director, I would not want to be fielding questions about some of the day-to-day operational stuff. It's like we've got bigger issues, like a huge fundraising gap. Can we talk about that right now and
Yep.
not, you know, how many billable hours is one particular person did or whatever. I don't know. I'm making
Oh my
something up
gosh.
that's
Yes.
more like operational. And I found myself sometimes very well meaning that board members, because of their expertise, we tend to go down these rabbit holes in board meetings on these very kind of operational things. I mean, even just down to like details on what we should do at the next trivia night and how should registration go. I'm like, time out, time out. Can we not do this? So I definitely am living in personal experience of some of
Yeah.
those kind of rabbit holes, and I've definitely find that I agree. Like the collaboration of high level goals should be done by both internal team members, whether it's like senior leadership and other internal stakeholders, the team executing the work, whatever it might be. But then also board members, but also some of the kind of how do we measure things. I think there's like just different layers of like what you measure
Yeah.
and then kind of rolling up. And I just always caution our clients just, I'm all for transparency, but I think there's almost like an over transparency for people that don't always completely understand like all of the things. And we don't want to
Yeah.
create unnecessary concern or hysteria about things that maybe
Yeah.
is not of their concern or influence or is just going to throw us down a rabbit hole at a finance committee. Like I said, we're not going to present the profit and loss statement in such a granular level of detail that we're going to be talking for 15 minutes about why we spent 50% more on postage,
Mm.
even though the total expense is like $600 on a $3 million budget. Like these things happen. So be kind
Yeah.
of thoughtful at like different layers within the organization on how you present that information so you kind of keep things the conversation's targeted at what you really
Yeah.
need help. And you had mentioned something that I think is really important that I've really valued as somebody that serves on boards. As somebody either leading an organization or working for an organization, being really intentional about asking your board members, what do you need from them? Like, how do you
Hmm.
want them to contribute? Sometimes with my financial background, I get on and I'm having this conversation and I will oftentimes ask that, like, just to be clear, like, what are you hoping that I will help you with? Because this might just be context and I'm solving a problem you already have figured
Hmm.
out. How can I help you? Or what are you looking for in this situation to keep the micromanagey element
Hmm.
out of the equation, which is super
Yeah.
important. You had talked earlier about, federal grants and
Hmm.
grants that can really change things in a big way. I mean, I've seen
Hmm.
clients that, are less than $1 million in revenue, and then they get a significant grant, and all of a sudden they're 3, 4 times the size, right? And this
Hmm.
is exponentially increasing their programming. And when things probably already felt a bit squirrely, hard to put your arms around because that's just the nature of the work that we do. And then you compound or exacerbate your pain points through the expansion of something like a huge grant. You're in full on survival mode. I'm just curious, like, how do you coach these leaders of nonprofits that you work with on how to grow their programming without sacrificing their people in the process? And maybe it's not program,
Yeah.
maybe it's support infrastructure. I'm just curious what you start advising your clients on that are considering this or in the middle of this right now.
Yeah, one of the things, I come in sometimes and I help even with the relationship that leaders have with their firms or accounting,
Mm,
because not
hmm
everybody is the charity CFO, but like there are people who are intimidated to ask accounting questions or their financial needs
mm,
because they don't know or understand. So I've actually been hired to help with the reporting of federal grants or even some bigger
mm,
funders who receive federal grants and were in charge of dispersing even a step further. And I realized is that it's not only that they didn't know what they were getting themselves into, but it's also like a lot of leaders are just scared to admit that they don't know what the
hmm
questions to ask are. And so I'm like, there are literally situations where I sit with them. I was like, okay, um, you have a bookkeeper or you have a firm who does your taxes every year. You can actually I don't want to use the word demand, but you can work with them to get some of
Sure.
these things. Let me
Right.
give you the questions you should ask. And
Right.
they're like, and they're like, oh, we're in the, or maybe they did put, working with someone with finance. I was like, great, let me prepare you for selecting the right firm that's going to work with you. Make sure they
hmm
understand these things and make sure there's like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought every accountant knew what they were doing, or everybody. I was like,
hmm
no, like make sure they understand the basic categorizing of your books. Make sure they and understand that you should have program codes and all these things that they didn't know went on the back end because maybe they've never
hmm
been in the weeds. And I'm like, you don't have to learn accounting, but you have to know the questions to ask. And
Right.
sometimes I come in that middle, like, how do I
hmm
educate them? And then I come from a place of like, I've actually been hired sometimes by the funder to do this. So I come from a place like, I'm not snitching on you. I don't care what you know or you don't know. This is a free and safe space. Let me win you
hmm
over by knowing that there's no dumb question. Like, let's go through it together. Let me show you the uniform guidance. Let me show you how
hmm
it works. Like, do you know that there's
hmm
even a place where you can look it up yourself? Like, don't be intimidated. Like, nobody knows this book by by memory. Like,
hmm
you can find some of these things that are written and then, first really breaking that, like earning their trust and breaking
hmm
that misconception that they have to be an accountant or someone with a finance background to know these big and heavy topics. And then from there, we work through it. Once we get there, we're like, okay, you're gonna probably need to hire here. Good thing you budgeted for it. You didn't budget for this, so let's see if we can solve it through technology. There might be
Yeah.
a software or something that can help you fill the gap here. Look, you might be able to talk to your bookkeeper if they can handle this report, or if they know of somebody who can
hmm
handle this report. So that's one less report your team has to do. And so we start kind of playing like Tetris, like what parts can you do? What parts can you not? And is there a way of outsourcing that matches an already approved budget, right? Because
hmm
if the federal funds already gave you the money, it's locked in. You would probably
Right.
have to
Let's
go.
spend them in that way.
Yeah, yeah. You probably have to go to the lot to like ask for a different line item or so really getting to know that part, because unfortunately I do sometimes come in after the funds. If I can come in before, then we can ask the right questions in the application and the budget that they submit. But if not, it's fine ways how we can make it. And then I'm a huge, the capacity, the word capacity, the words capacity building means so much.
hmm
It comes from a place of like, okay, don't just sign up your bookkeeper. Maybe you do have an in-house bookkeeper. Don't just sign up for a get a prime score. Add your program director, add the
mm
assistant director. Like they need to know why keeping that receipt is so important.
Right.
They need
Right.
to know why, if you treat the staff for a conference or something, why they can't order a drink on that meal ticket,
hmm
like all of these things, like invite people throughout the organization to get the capacity building.
hmm
Don't just assume that they all know this. And it makes it easier. Like, again, because I come sometimes as that liaison for maybe the first time that organization got this huge grant. I have to work with like I'll have bookkeepers or accountants at work. It's like, thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
And it's not that they didn't explain it, but maybe they needed someone to explain it in that kind of real life situation. Like the reason why they needed this spreadsheet reported the right way. I've seen people like federal grants will give you usually a budget that you have to submit. Like they'll give you
Oh
the Excel
yeah.
sheet they want submitted, you know. They're very technical to the federal grants. And I've seen orgs who come and change the names of the category.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, you can't do that. You
Right.
need to change your QuickBooks to match the categories, not the other way around. And
Yeah.
so, like, and they're like, well, why? Why can't they just figure it out? I'm like, because they are giving thousands, like millions of dollars to thousands of organizations across the US. The auditors doing this need to
Hmm.
be able to quickly, like, you know, see this and hold the people accountable for public funds. And they're like,
Hmm.
oh, I didn't know. I thought they were just looking at our grant. No, like they're constantly reviewing reports across everything. So if the categories match and the receipts are in the right folder and labeled the right number, they can quickly audit and go bam, bam, bam. Because
Right.
they're going to add up all those columns, they're going to add up all the receipts in the folder, and they're going to be like, this doesn't add up.
Yes. The math is not
So
mathing.
yes, and then they're like, so sometimes I literally go back, like, paint yourself the picture of this federal employee who's probably overworked and underpaid like you are.
Mm.
This is a federal
Hmm.
hires employee, or whoever it is from whatever CDC, USDA, whatever. And there's somebody's job is to review the spreadsheet and folder that you submitted.
Yeah.
And it's not that they don't believe you're spending the money right, but it's like they have to do this in a manner because they're responsible. And then they're like, oh, okay. So if I take the extra 10 minutes to make sure my program director puts the receipts and labels them correctly, I'm saving on the back end, also somebody else's, job in reality, and you're looking prepared.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I tend to come from that place of it's safe to ask. And I tell people I follow your journey and the way you break down accounting and finance and like, but not every accountant does that, and
No.
not everybody finds the right person with nonprofit. So to me, it's about like, let's go back from the beginning and let's just, what do you know? What do you not know? And let me
Right.
empower you to ask the questions because you don't have to know it all, but then ask these questions to your bookkeeper, ask these questions to your firm. Who's the board member in the finance committee? Can they also maybe take be the extra auditor before a contract
Right.
is submitted or something like that. Like things like that. How can we use the things that you have? If not, then let's look at the software who might do it. You have a software line item. Let's see if we can use that to make your life a little bit easier. But I would say a lot like earning that trust, engaging what do they know and
Hmm.
where can we build capacity across not just the executive director, not even just the grants manager, like down to the person who is expensing those items because it's their program that they're getting.
Right.
That is key. That is what capacity building means to me. Like everybody in that line should be
Yeah.
capacitated.
I feel like I'm often brought into conversations probably like you when the infrastructure is crumbling, the cracks have been forming for a while. Now we're in a bit of a reactive mode. And some of my takeaways from what you just said, and then I'll plus one with that in my own lived experience, is that growth really should be kind of system led and you should have repeatable, scalable workflows. And if there are cracks, in systems, workflows, processes, it will
Mhm,
be exponentially exacerbated or whatever.
mhm,
When you start compounding program growth, and largely it's not going to be small incremental growth. I'm talking really significant growth by way of large grants, whether it's local grants, but especially federal grants, that adds a whole separate and
mhm,
additional layer of compliance on there. So I always really caution folks that if you feel like you have antiquated workflows, processes that are not being followed, nobody can seem to submit a credit card receipt for charges happening. There just seems to be the cracks in the foundation. We have to address the cracks in the foundation first, ideally, before we go and add on you know, substantial growth in that way. There's a lot of takeaways from that, but I want to talk about something that's a little awkward, that I find myself in a lot of times and I have my own personal lived experience through this, not just with working at a nonprofit and having to be the leadership responsible for staffing changes there, but also obviously growing a firm that has grown significantly over the last couple of years. I think there's an uncomfortable reality that we as leaders have to accept that as we grow really significantly in the short term or in the long term, the people that made sense in those roles and their skills and their experience made sense in those roles at a point in time in an organization. But with growth comes the hard truth that maybe the organization needs something different than what that person can give. Whether it's, I've seen situations where maybe there's a part-time person there and now the organization needs full-time because the volume has just simply increased, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe it's somebody that's, really great at bookkeeping, but now they have a lot of like grant tracking and multi-dimensional accounting and across different programs and funding sources. And this person just doesn't have the experience to do this. Or now, by getting a grant, they have to be audited. And your bookkeeper's like, look, I know how to do bookkeeping, but I don't know how to prepare for an audit, like a financial statement. I don't know how to do accrual-based accounting and, calculate lease obligations and all of these things. I'm just giving that as an example. Or if you are a grassroots organization that relied really heavily on individual giving and you have a really like charming, charismatic, like relationship builder in that way, but all of a sudden you want to add like grant writing may not necessarily be their thing, or events, special events may not, they're like, I like people, but I don't know the first thing about logistics and like creating
Mhm.
project. It's like for events. And so a lot of times in our work, we oftentimes have to really kind of observe, is it really a system issue or is it also a people issue? And how do we address the people issue? And I'm going to say something I don't know if I've ever publicly said on this podcast before, but so often I see nonprofit organizations, they view it as a capacity issue when it could be a system issue or a people issue, but they're looking at it as a time issue. And they just keep adding more and more people. Like, oh, this doesn't work. So what we need is more people. So then they keep hiring more people. And then it just
Mhm.
compounds the problem because not only was all this stuff a mess, but now you have all these people with diffuse responsibilities and nobody knows who's in charge, who's supposed to fix it, who's doing what, blah, 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 blah. And then I'm like, okay, we already didn't have enough resources. Now we have like 3x the payroll that we should be spending on this issue. It's not actually solving the problem. We need to like rewind and go all the way to the beginning. So I had to say it in this conversation today because I find myself so often being the one like, who's going to tell this person? Who's going to tell
Yeah.
this person? It's not a time issue, it's a system, maybe even a people issue. And there's some
Mhm.
really hard decisions that we have to make on shifting the workflows and the culture of how we operate internally. Hey, y'all, you can't not submit your receipts. Going forward, there's going to be some disciplinary procedures if you don't submit your documentation or something. I'm making something up. But, or it's some really hard decisions of like, this has been a really amazing, loyal person for a really long time, but the role just doesn't make sense for the organization anymore. And how do we navigate that? It's going to be really hard, right? These are things that are reality for
Mhm.
growing organizations, for profit, nonprofit. I've had to make the same tough decisions in both camps when I was at the nonprofit and the for profit, where
Mhm.
you have to have that really like moment of self-reflection and really dial in
Yeah.
on like what is the actual root problem here. And the compounded problem, so many times you have executive directors, they know their thing, whether it's it came up on the program side or came up on the fundraising side or whatever it might be. But when people tell them, hey, this is the problem, they often believe that is the problem because they don't know enough about the function of the business, right? And that's not their
Right.
expertise to like really diagnose it, right?
Yeah.
For example, and I'm just speaking from my own experience, like the financial management, the accounting is a disaster. And then I have, a nurse that, through the program side became eventually an executive director. And they're like, yeah, I really know the program side. I'm a medical professional. I don't know the first thing about accounting. And they just keep telling me it's a time issue. And I'm like, it's not a time issue. But they wouldn't know that, and kind of
Yeah.
understandably so. So I love your kind of case studies of which people will call you like, hey, help me diagnose the
Yeah.
issue. And I think sometimes if it just doesn't feel right, try to
Mhm.
get a second opinion or just
Yeah.
an outsider perspective of like, is this really the issue? Because
Yeah.
we got to get out of the trap of just adding more band-aids that just continue to compound the problem. I see it all the time, all the
I
time. I
feel
don't know
very.
about you, Andrea. Am I totally off base? Like maybe it's just my world I live in, but I see it all the
Mm.
time.
I literally I preach that people are not the reason. sometimes, to just keep hiring. Like if
Hmm.
you have a perfect example I use is it's very old school, but like my program director is spending too much time tracking attendance for our tutoring program. And so they're like, let's hire another program director who will just handle attendance. And I'm like, there's probably technology for that to check in
Exactly.
and check out with timestamps so that you know when be or if you don't want to invest in software because nobody's training your you can do a Google form with a QR code and people can check in and
Mm-hmm.
check out with a Google form and then you could just have that person teach them with an Excel class to take the data and pivot table it so you have some
Hmm.
findings. There's different ways, or maybe take them to a software who does this, but it's the answer is not let's keep the signing sheet that someone has to
Hmm.
manually input and hire someone else to handle that process. That's a very small example because there are many bigger ones. Like,
Hmm.
when it comes to finance, like what does your this reimbursement process look like? Are you
Hmm.
still like scanning every receipt and putting it in, an Excel sheet and then sending that to your supervisor and then they're emailing it back and there's no like use of collaboration, like,
Hmm.
and not everything has to be tech. I do prefer, the
Right.
implementation and uptraining of tech, but like it's also at the tech savviness of the organization and the
Yeah.
individuals working in there. And you can choose to upscale their technology, or if they're not going to embrace it, then it is time to make the hard decision to hire or skill, unfortunately,
Hmm.
and see if they pivot. So no, I absolutely agree with you. Like it could definitely, it could be a people issue, it could be a system issue, it could be a combination of all the things put together.
Hmm.
And if I worked in the tech space for the last 3 to 4 years as well with a startup, who worked with nonprofits. And one of the only things that I learned that's different from tech and the nonprofit sector is that nonprofits, and as an executive director and working in one, we have to be very reactive. We have to solution,
Hmm.
solution, solution, and we are the answers for our staff. We are the answers for our
Hmm.
volunteers. We are the answer for our community. In tech, they actually spend time looking at the problem and then collaboratively solving it, whether it's through like engineering
Hmm.
or whatever
Hmm.
UX UI. And that has for me also shaped the way I consult
Hmm.
because even for fundraisers, if there's any fundraisers listening in, there are some times where I meet with boards and they're like, we need more money. What nonprofit person is not going to tell you we need more money? And then I asked some questions and I'm like, and then I realized that the board has never given or get or have any kind of commitment financial to the organization. They've never even shared their Giving Tuesday campaign. And I'm like,
Hmm.
that's a problem.
Hmm.
Who
Hmm.
is actually financially committed to the organization,
Yeah.
So is your issue money or your board governance and your board engagement and then the
Hmm.
people in networks and then, and so many other things, right? Because it'll be marketing. So like, is the issue really you need more money or you need other foundational things to get you more money?
Right.
And so like that kind of premise has really stayed with me the last couple of years, especially when I work with clients. Let's really get to the root of the problem. Let's figure out if it's a skill gap, if it's a person gap, if it's, and to your point, there are really many great and passionate people who work in the nonprofit sector. You will have to make the decision. And you can offer
Mhm.
it. Hey, I'd like to send you to get certified in Salesforce.
Yeah.
Let me know now if this is something you want to do or you don't, and if not, like we'll need to hire for that. These are the needs of the organization. And, um, using all of that to really solve the actual root of the problem. But I agree with you. I think it's usually a combination. It's one or the other, or and then just trying not to be as reactive and really taking a step back and being strategic in our solutioning is very
Hmm.
important.
You bring up a good point, that and I communicate this to my team that our clients are 100% nonprofit leaders and they are as much as there's not a single person I've talked to, and I've talked to thousands and thousands of nonprofit leaders over the last, 20-ish years I've been doing this. Not a single person is like, no, I really enjoy being reactive. I don't want to be proactive. I just want to keep putting fires out every day. Like it's quite the opposite, right? We want to be proactive and our clients want to be proactive, but the reality is life in that environment is very reactive, like whether it's our funders or like you said, our volunteers, our clients that we're working with, our auditors, our you name it, or board members,
Mhm.
right? We have to be very reactive. And I think you bring up a good point that how do we switch gears from the reality that our day to day is very reactive to points where sometimes we have to try to really do some of the diagnosis. I joke that oftentimes my series of many questions of like what is the root of the problem, I guess I credit my many years as a former auditor. So I like to ask lots and lots of questions. We're running out of time, so let me ask you and kind of leave with this last question. So many nonprofit leaders, I think, find themselves still in kind of like the day to day. They try to develop systems, they try to develop people, but they're still involved in like all of the things, right? They're involved in every meeting or every decision. What is like one piece of advice you would leave our leaders with that they could maybe go out and do this week to try to get out of that merry-go-round or that never-ending cycle of every decision, every meeting, everything has to fall on
Mhm.
me, despite the fact that I desperately want to turn the page and be more system led.
Something I wish I had done too in my early career in the nonprofit sector is to delegate more, but
Mm,
delegate not just like, here, can you do this for me? And let people like in the win. So I would challenge an executive director listening here to pick one thing that they would like off their plate, create an SOP, which is a standard operating procedure document, whether it's a one-liner step one, like
mhm,
offload the knowledge. That is a transfer of knowledge. And maybe give that to somebody who has the capacity. Don't just give it to
mhm,
other burning people, but like someone whose role would grow if they learn this skill that normally you do. Pick one thing. If you could pick one thing and then reflect on that, did that actually save give me more time back? Did this ask them like, hey, was the SOP good? Did you understand it? Can we start building a library of SOPs? And like imagine if
mhm,
you picked one thing a month to just
mhm,
offload and document.
mhm.
And then, oh my God. And then all of a sudden, it's like that person is like, wow, this was really cool. Now I want to offload a task and I want to
Sure,
document. And that's how succession plan, that's how procedures get put together and knowledge of
sure.
transfer gets saved. And then obviously making sure it's saved on a drive that people can find. But
Right, right.
yeah, I would pick one thing, one task that you were
One
like,
thing.
wow, there is somebody in this org who could probably oversee um the 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 report on what our fundraising metrics was. And maybe normally you do it for the fundraiser. See if you can uptrain on how you do it and build the
Hmm.
SOP. Whatever. Pick
I
pick
love
one thing
that.
you can do and do that. Hmm.
Yeah, and I'll leave too. I'll echo everything that you had said. I have two books that kind of speak to this for anybody looking for like a bigger deep dive in Andrea, you might already have read these, but one that's like super popular that people love, it's E-Myth. It speaks to that, right? Documenting your processes and creating a backup system so that if in the event that you were not available, or how do you start actually in a practical way start delegating and the importance of it. And I read that and that really resonated with me. But compounding and adding to that theory of creating kind of backup systems is another book I love. It's really geared towards like for-profit entrepreneurs, but it's called Clockwork Your Business. And it really speaks to the need for the purpose of the business just being vulnerable in the absence of a leader that has their hands kind of still involved in everything. And it's really not, to me, an ego thing. It was really more of a vulnerability for the benefit of my clients and my team members, that in the event that I was somehow off the grid for a period of time, that the world would still continue on in the short and the long term. And what I loved about this particular book is it spoke to the need for the senior leader, in my case, me, to take a full 30 days off, unplug completely. So what I find is people build these systems and processes like any other good risk management program, literally never tested. Nobody tests if these processes are understood. Nobody tests if this actually works, right? Nobody tests if they actually have access to the things they need to do the thing, whatever it might be. Nobody tests these things. And so by forcing yourself of complete removal of the business, Clockwork suggests that you do this for 30 days because think of all the things that happen in a 30-day cycle. You might be finding new volunteers. You might be hiring new employees. You're processing payroll. You're paying bills. You might be meeting with a funder. You might, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So like within a 30-day cycle, a lot of like ongoing business activity has a chance to run its full cycle. And so what I did is I kind of set out on this journey. It took me about 18 months to test it. And then I did that. And then I learned a lot from it. And then that gives me homework to go back and like refine. So if anybody's out there looking for validation and evidence to take to your board on why you need a sabbatical, every couple of
I
years.
love that. I
Use it
love
as in
that.
like, this isn't really a sabbatical for me. It's more of a risk management test. But
Perfect.
whatever, use it to your advantage. And what I love about Clockwork is it tells you like, put it on the calendar, agree to it, communicate to your board. I'm taking 30 days off for the continuity and the sustainability of this organization. Next summer, make something up, put it on the calendar, and then work really hard to get to the point where you can actually do that. And things will fall apart. It will be kind of messy, but you're going to learn from it. And then your team's going to know exactly what they need to do differently. So, anyway, leaving that with anybody
Love that.
listening, because I did this, it was a kind of a really interesting experiment. And interestingly, not only did I get out of the weeds of a lot of things through that process, but a fun fact like the metrics that we measure, everything was better that month I was gone because my team's like, oh my God, I gotta bring it. Tasha's not here to save me. Everything went fine. And in fact, across the board, all the metrics that we measure for just kind of defining our success were actually better than like average. So, there's something to that. And if you all needed that extra little nudge, that's it, because I've had this whole experience. And like I said, I took the ego out of it. I often joke I need to make myself irrelevant because the organization, any nonprofit, is largely in perpetuity, and we need to continue on, and we need to have a path for that. And for our staff, not just us, but like our staff. So anyway, Dr. Andrea Ortega, people want to know more about your work and need some help to get this ball rolling. What is the best way for people to connect with you? Website, LinkedIn, where?
Yeah. At www.palantenonprofits.com, there is a booking Calendly for me or anybody on my team. We do
Okay.
30-minute free consultations to get to know you and your needs. And I have
Okay.
a large network, so I do refer when necessary. And
Okay.
also Instagram, pretty active
Okay.
on me on Instagram and LinkedIn. Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll put that in the show notes for anybody looking to get in touch with you to get some help on this.
Thank you
But I
so
just want to
much.
say thank you again for having this like open, honest, kind of raw conversation with me. It's something I'm super passionate about as, kind of an exhausted leader myself sometimes.
Yeah.
We're always looking for solutions on how do we continue to process and grow and scale without
Yes.
sacrificing ourselves or our team. So thank you so much for
Yeah.
that.
Thank you so much, Tisha.
All right. And shameless plug, as I always do, anybody listening, if you found this conversation helpful or insightful, share it with someone else in your network. But also, the Meta World, engage with it in some way, wherever you're watching or listening to this, so that other nonprofit leaders like yourself can find insights like this conversation. We'll see you all next time. Bye now.